The CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Calvin Alexander.
Hey Cowboy fans, today's episode is brought to you by Oakley Burklow, your go-to independent insurance agent and proud OSU alum. Oakley helps with home, auto, life, and business insurance. Working with multiple top-rated insurance companies to find you the right coverage at the right price. Licensed in Oklahoma and Arkansas. Call 918-280-9068 or email oakley.burklow@connectmyinsurance.com. Personal service, honest advice, and a fellow poke helping you protect what matters most. Welcome back to yet another episode of the CGA Tour podcast, the Calvin Glenn Alexander Tour here. And today's podcast, I am brought to you with, of course, Marshall Scott, the fellow podcaster here with Pistols Firing, of course, the man who does it all. And Marshall, how's it going?
I'm doing well. I'm a little tired. I think I've been tired since maybe October, but we're hanging in there. Just a couple more weeks left of the year.
Seems like it's that kind of season. You know, it's the time of year where Thanksgiving break should be a break, but really it's just kind of a extra couple days of work, especially when Oklahoma State plays basketball at a 9:51 p.m. tip local time. So I can't believe that was the Central time. You know, the Thunder play, of course, at 10 p.m. tonight, but that's in the West Coast. That's in San Francisco. So anyways, I digress. I want to bring you on, of course, talking about a bunch of different things. It's been a while, but first ask you here, the news of the day, year, month, maybe next 5 years is Eric Morris coming to Stillwater. Granted, not yet. Got a little bit of stalling going on, but he's still working behind the scenes. You've been covering extremely well. Pistols Firing. What's like the best piece of information you've learned about Eric Morris so far?
It's definitely like the quarterback stuff that's probably been played out a little bit at this point. But his eye for quarterback talent. I think if you're an Oklahoma State fan, if you're not, why are you watching this podcast? That's sort of weird. But if you're an Oklahoma State fan, you know the struggles that the Cowboys have had at that position of late. Not to say that every guy that Morris recruits or scouts is a sure thing, but I think you feel pretty good about his efficiencies in that area. So I think that's the thing that sticks out most to me. Obviously, he's a great offensive mind. He's a Big 12 guy. I think that's maybe more important than it might seem, just to have a idea of like the culture of the Big 12 and things like that. Him being from Texas Tech. And then I think, his ties to the state of Texas, I think that's a big deal. Whenever you are a coach at Oklahoma State, no matter what the sport, Texas is a big deal to your roster. So, I think there were a lot of good points, boxes checked that Morris had that maybe some of the other candidates didn't. I think the quarterback thing is what gets me most excited. Just because, we've seen over the last couple of years how important, obviously, that position is to the game.
Yeah, and it seems like this year, really the last 3 games of the season, the quarterback position became more under fire just because it was kind of the whole offense, because the defense was playing so well, Clint Bowen and his staff. What have you heard from kind of Eric Morris hiring of like how many other guys might have been in the mix? Was it for sure Morris at the end, or was this all just so closely held to the chest that really we don't know?
Yeah, I think the list of 4 or 5 names I think was pretty consistent throughout everybody's reporting. So I think Colin Klein was involved. I think Alex Golish was involved. I think maybe to a lesser extent towards the end, Zach Robinson was probably involved. Kane Womack, the Alabama DC. I think it coming out as early as it did. We're recording this on Tuesday, is a week ago today. I think that sort of indicated to me that, like, okay, this was the guy that Oklahoma State wanted. This is the guy that Chad Weiberg wanted, and they went and got him. So I think, as with any good search, I imagine there's a couple of different irons in the fire, but Oklahoma State getting it done early, I think says a lot of what they thought about Eric Morris.
Yeah, it definitely goes to show that maybe we did this well by getting out ahead of it. It seems like that's kind of the best deal. What, from the aspects of how this was handled, why should Oklahoma State fans be so excited and happy compared to the Lane Kiffin era? I mean, of course, it seems obvious, like less turmoil and type of stuff, but what can you speak to the fact of how professionally this was done?
Yeah, I think whenever you go back to Gundy's firing on that Tuesday, there were a lot of questions. I think they were, fair questions of like, hey, this guy's done so much, obviously 21 years, all the success, all that stuff. He's going to have a stadium or a statue at the stadium someday, more than likely. firing him when you did. I think that was fair to ask questions about that. I think, I still think it probably should have been done if it was going to be done on that Sunday rather than the Tuesday. That certainly got a little awkward, but given the result of, what transpired this past weekend with all the Lane Kiffin stuff, and then, Lane accepts that LSU job, and then all of a sudden everybody's, the dominoes start falling really quickly. You've got, Golish to Auburn, you've got Summerall to Florida, you've got Silverfield to Arkansas. That all happened like right after the Kiffin stuff finally started rolling. So I think if, looking back, you're like, that sort of sucked that it had to be mid-season. But I think it allowed Weiberg, it allowed Oklahoma State to sort of get their ducks in a row, and to have that done before Thanksgiving while the guy is still coaching. And I feel like, maybe I'm just on Twitter and I've heard like some olds on Facebook maybe weren't so happy about the hire, but it feels like almost a universally praised hire in a weird way, which I don't know that happens, very often. You look at the Silverfield hire at Arkansas, there's a decent portion of the Arkansas fan base that's not stoked about that hire. So yeah, for it to get wrapped up before Thanksgiving, get wrapped up before all the drama that was this past weekend, I think that just goes to show that like this probably was handled the right way. I still think it, should have been on that Sunday rather than Tuesday whenever they let Gundy go. But yeah, I don't know that you're at this point right now if you didn't make that move as early as you did.
Yeah, well, also talking about the quarterback depth in the Oklahoma State depth chart, as well as Drew Mestemaker, who got so many thousands of questions about him, but really it's, hey, any ideas if he would transfer and follow the same path that kind of Cam Ward followed Eric Morris, Washington State? And granted, of course, Morris left Washington State before Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer went to OU, but any ideas here, any speculation on how that process kind of works, or is it not necessarily a tandem deal with transfer portal openings and closings, all that type of stuff as well?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I do think that there is a chance, and a pretty decent one, that Drew Mestemaker does follow Eric Morris to Stillwater. With that being said, he's last I checked was the nation's leader in passing. So I'd imagine if and when he does hit the portal, that there are going to be different suitors, maybe looking at him and stuff like that. But it would feel, unless they promote somebody from within, it would be tough to be a group of 5 quarterback who had the season that Drew Mestemaker had, and then you lose your head coach on top of that. I think it would be tough to just stay in one spot after that. So I imagine he'll look at his options, and I think Oklahoma State will be one of those options. I think that's pretty. I don't think it takes rocket science or even really firm speculation to think that he might be interested in following his coach up a level. So yeah, I think it's a possibility. I don't know that it's like locked in, but I certainly think it's a possibility.
And also kind of from your time, like scouting and, really just like covering Oklahoma State football and covering stuff when we're both students and everything like that. How often does a guy go from not starting? I mean, this is the thing Drew Mestemaker's known for, not starting a high school football game in varsity or JV, started the freshman B team, which I did look up. School as a 2,500 enrollment, which would like my high school had 100% enrollment. So I get they have the bodies to do it, but how often does it go where a guy is known as a punter and a safety to leading college football and passing his freshman year? Is this something we've seen before? I mean, it just seems like it just is total crapshoot. How did Morris find the guy? 30,000 more questions to ask, right?
Yeah, if it has been done before, I don't know of it. Yeah, so the story goes, Eli Letterman, who is based in Oklahoma, worked for The World, now works for ESPN. He wrote a great story on sort of Eric Morris and Drew Mestemaker and the whole thing that North Texas has going on this year. And he mentioned the quarterback coach, texted Eric Morris and was like, "Hey, I got a guy for you." And Morris told him, "All right, send me his film." And then the quarterback coach is like, "Well, you see, that's the thing. He doesn't really have any film." So then he goes and looks at him, and he offers him his preferred walk-on spot. Climbs the depth chart really quickly to QB2, and then is starting their bowl game as a true freshman, is able to retain his red shirt, and then this season starts and he's off to the races. So yeah, it's a super unique story. It's a super cool story. Mestemaker seems like a really cool kid as well. So yeah, I've never seen anything like it. It seems like something that maybe if you took to Hollywood, they'd be like, that's not realistic enough. So yeah, it's super weird.
Yeah, and I mean, also the line of guys that Morris has now coached or been involved in coaching part of their careers who have been former walk-ons. I mean, way back we don't necessarily love talking about Baker Mayfield, but now that he's no longer playing against us, it's okay. And Baker was a walk-on when Morris was kind of the co-OC/wide receivers coach at Tech. And then, of course, Mestemaker walk-on, Cam Ward walk-on, John Mateer walk-on. It just is such a hard thing to believe that this guy is so good at scouting. But like you said, all he would have thrown out the script. So it's kind of good to hear that the unprecedented could be true, because he's not done it just once or twice. He's probably going to get, it seems like 4 for 4 guys get drafted in the NFL. I don't want to speak for Mestemaker too much, but Mateer seems on that line. And if Mestemaker keeps playing the way he is, one would hope, one would think, especially when you've got guys in the NFL, for example, Minnesota Vikings quarterback this past weekend who played at Minnesota, and I couldn't remember his name until I looked at the stats. So guys are getting shots in the NFL, even when they play at UNT for all 4 years, which I don't think either of us think Mestemaker will end up doing. Well, I want to ask you, of course, too, we are recording this on Tuesday, the day before signing day. Seen a lot of like OSU kind of tweets with eyeballs emojis and X and stuff like that, specifically talking about from McLean Baxley last night. Hey, get ready. And I'm like seeing that tweet 7 hours ago. I'm like, dude, 6 a.m., 7 hours ago, you're saying get ready for the day. What's going on Tuesday? I mean, what kind of is all the surrounding speculation of signing day and how it could go down for Oklahoma State and commitments flip and all type of stuff? What are you hearing the latest here?
Yeah, it's been a weird, obviously, just given what's happened within the football program. It's been a weird cycle for this 2026 class. It started off pretty good. They had a pretty decent class in. Mike Gundy gets fired. That starts to fall apart. I think as of right now, which it's changed rapidly over the last even like 24 hours, Oklahoma State is down to 4 commits in the class, which is not a lot. Back in the day, you took a class of 25. I don't think Oklahoma State's going to get up to 25. I do think that there will be, a little bit more movement between now and tomorrow morning. I think, there's guys that, the North Texas staff, the Eric Morris staff is going to be interested in. There were guys that were committed that it didn't seem like they were maybe as interested in, and they, sort of parted ways with that group. So, it's been in flux, I think is a good way to put it. I do think there will be, a couple of maybe surprises tomorrow morning. But yeah, it's ticking down, and I don't think it's a super big deal. I think this is probably just, an issue, obviously, with the calendar. This calendar is horrible. There's coaches coaching this weekend who are like on other teams also. So it's the calendar needs a lot of work. This is a, sort of a footnote, as crazy as it sounds, in the midst of all of that. So yeah, I think that it's going to get a little weird. I think there will be some positives. I think there maybe will be 1 or 2 of these guys that also still don't sign. So it's going to be a weird signing day. It's always a little weird at Oklahoma State because it's not like it's usually pretty, just about what you're going to get. There's maybe one surprise every morning, but just about what you're going to get whenever you go into signing day. And this one, it feels a little crazy. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow?
And I saw that you, I think 20 hours ago as we're recording this podcast, so it's just a fresh thing you wrote, although you're writing something frequently right now. This is the time to do it, about the North Texas GM, Raj Murti, and how he kind of integrates the high school players more than he would on than supplementing everyone with the transfer portal. We saw how the transfer portal went for Oklahoma State last year, where, hey, I got really excited personally. I was like, hey, transfer portal, all this, we're doing better than you would think, and everything, especially after a 3-win season. And then it just didn't work out in the end, for whatever reason. I'm not going to go into that. But I really listened to that podcast a lot and kind of video interviews that you linked as well, too. And what can you say to kind of Raj Murti? And he's already working for Oklahoma State staff and already working. And he's 24. He's younger than you and I. It's just kind of crazy. What can you kind of say to his philosophy on recruiting guys to get them in and how they kind of go about business?
Yeah, super interesting, dude. You mentioned that he's 24. He graduated with a finance degree from Houston in 2 years because he entered Houston with 52 college credits already. So obviously a super smart dude. He's got a lot of confidence to him as well. If I was 24 and in some of the the video interviews that he's doing, I wouldn't sound nearly as put together that he's got going on. But yeah, he mentioned in one of those that they like to build the boat with high school recruits and then patch it with the transfer portal. I think for this initial wave, it's going to be different just because of, like we discussed, the calendar. They're not fully over here. Signing day is tomorrow. So I imagine a lot of this first group is going to be built through the portal. But I think that's an interesting thing. And he's got a lot of ties to, he's been on staffs at Houston. He's been on staffs at TCU. He's obviously been on the staff at North Texas. So there's a lot of different areas of Texas that he's sort of been ingrained in, that I think that'll be beneficial for Oklahoma State. He mentioned Sonny Dykes and Dana Holgerson as guys who kind of helped him get in the door at UNT. I think there's a lot to like there. He's still obviously really young. I imagine there's a lot of growth that's going to happen, obviously, with this step up in competition level and stuff like that. But it's cool for Oklahoma State to. It hasn't felt like they really have stepped into that new era fully yet. I think nothing says here's a new era like a 24-year-old college football GM. So I'm looking forward to sort of seeing how that play out and learning what I don't even know yet. So yeah.
Yeah, I graduated college at 24. I mean, 23 and a half and, a little bit, but August after graduation, I was 24. So just kind of crazy to think that the guy here is doing that. Granted, I got a couple degrees, but we all know the story there at that point if you listen to the podcast. So it just is insane to hear and see a guy that is, as you said, so well-spoken and is already working for Oklahoma State. The next question, of course, Afri, is who else could be working for Oklahoma State and not know it yet? Or maybe know it a little bit later on. I put up photos here in the top right next to my head here of Zach Robinson and, of course, Jim Knowles, which I give a 0% chance to working out, but maybe there's 1% chance. I don't know. Who do you think could be the future OC in DC? Any guesses? Any ideas here on rumors swirling around?
Yeah, I think there might be a guy with an OC title, but I imagine Eric Morris is still going to call plays. DC wise, it's looking like it's Skylar Cassidy, who is his DC at North Texas. I think it's going to be a pretty heavy UNT staff. It looks like. I believe Bill Haston wrote something yesterday that was like, basically termination for most, if not all, of Oklahoma State's coaches has happened. So, I think it's going to be a pretty UNT heavy staff. If it is Skylar Cassidy at DC, he's the brother of Braden Cassidy, who was a Cowboy back at Oklahoma State. And I believe their dad was also a defensive coordinator under Bob Simmons at Oklahoma State back in the day. So sort of a crazy tie there. I think it's going to be just, based on Murdy coming over already, I think it's going to be a pretty heavy UNT staff, which, it certainly has worked out at UNT this year. They're playing for a conference championship this weekend. So maybe it'll work out in Stillwater as well.
And then kind of talking about here a little off script on the guys that are in the portal right now that have entered the portal. I know you wrote about this as well just yesterday. Any big surprising name with everything going on, or any guy that you're like, man, I really thought that he went into the portal? Granted, I know 3 guys of the whole entire portal list that you have here have committed to a new school, even though the portal doesn't open until January 2nd. But what are you any kind of thoughts on, hey, surprised this guy entered or surprised this guy's still in there, et cetera?
Not necessarily. I think, with it being a coaching change, I think, a lot of those guys were going to put out feelers and sort of see what was out there for them. So I wasn't necessarily too shocked. Obviously, this is back in the middle of the season, but a guy like Josh Ford obviously stings a little bit. Noah McKinney does, especially given that whenever Noah McKinney hit the portal, he had a lot of really good options. So that, it's maybe tough to evaluate from a fan standpoint offensive line play, but it seems like Oklahoma State had a good one there in Noah McKinney. Grant Segrin, I think, is a guy who long term could be really good. I think he's a redshirt sophomore right now, but his development, his frame, I think he'll be a really good offensive lineman. I believe that Landon Cleveland just went in, or just announced that he has intentions to go in. He was a former 4-star recruit. I know the fan base is really excited about his future. But I don't know. I don't think there was a ton of guys that you're just like, dang, I can't believe that guy's gone. And I think some of that has to do with, the team went 1-11 last year. So it's you're sort of grasping at straws a little bit. So yeah, I'm not super surprised just because of all the transition. And this is sort of just the modern era of how things go now.
Yeah, I would love to see some of these guys not leave, just because I remember how excited we were when they were announced their commitment to Oklahoma State and then playing. But then again, like you said, 1-11, you're not there. There wasn't a guy that I'm just absolutely just perplexed he left or anything like that, because new coaching hire, all that stuff. The 2025 season will be remembered, in your words. How are you going to remember this season? I mean, will this be the season that, hey, Gundy got fired, or is this the season that the new wave started, new era? Hey, thanks so much to Doug Meacham, for how he handled everything down the stretch, because we've seen some coaches around the college ball landscape not handled extremely well, at least PR-wise. I know he didn't win a game, I'm well aware. But how will you remember the 2025 season overall?
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be the Gundy stuff, just because he was such a staple in Stillwater for so long. I think that, whenever in 10 years from now, I think I'll remember the Morris era, maybe more so by next year, and sort of how that plays out. But yeah, I think the Gundy firing, obviously the beatdown in Oregon, followed by that tough loss to Tulsa, which is obviously not a good thing if you're Oklahoma State to lose at home to Tulsa. I think that's sort of how I'm going to remember it. Just that this is the year that, closed the chapter on, the greatest era of Oklahoma State football to this point. So yeah, I think that's probably how I remember it. Doug Meacham was he captained the ship, I think, as best as he could, closing the year, and then Morris getting hired is a super big deal. But I think maybe I'll remember 2026 more as the start of the Morris era than the end of this year. I think this year is probably a Gundy thing in the annals of my mind, anyways.
And it's also kind of just bizarre for how much you've been following college football, for Gundy not to put out anything PR-wise except for a video promoting the hockey schedule for next spring. I mean, is there anything that I'm just like could be more just weirded out by? A guy who's a former Oklahoma State quarterback, of course. His name you'd figure will go in the Ring of Honor on the stadium at some point. Statue, TBD. Is this one of the weirdest kind of transitions to a new head coach you've seen, or just kind of from your time just covering the sport?
Yeah, it's weird because I've never really covered, a football coaching change. Obviously, the guy's been here for 21 years. So, but a lot of coaches who were let go over the course of this year, which there were a lot of them. A lot of those guys put out some sort of statement about the fan base. You're in Oklahoma State and you've invested in Gundy for 21 years plus his time as an assistant plus his time as a player. Yeah, it would have been nice to hear something, but also he doesn't talk a lot. He mentions that basically every press conference. He's like I don't talk to a ton of people, so maybe that's just something that he's not super interested in. Maybe there are some hard feelings that are still taking time to sort of get over. But yeah, I think it is a little weird. I'm not as hung up on it as some are, because he releases a statement and it's says the typical PR, thanks, had a blast, yada yada yada. Like, what does that really do for anybody? I don't know. So I'm not super hung up on it, but I do find it a little odd that nothing has been said to this point.
Yeah, I think Brian Kelly putting out something before Mike Gundy. It's just kind of the bizarre intersection here of Oklahoma State fandom and Mike Gundy and how things ended. I mean, Brian Kelly, of course, was fired for a cause, and then it's not cause, and there's a bunch of other rumors swirling around with the LSU government, with this Louisiana state government, and also with the LSU staff. And then, but Brian Kelly still has got the 10 seconds or 2 minutes to agree to put that out. Just clearly he's not, the guys aren't writing this, I'm well aware, and it's probably something weird to be hung up on. But Gundy was the coach for my entire fandom of Oklahoma State. Is kind of a long time to say so far, but 20 plus years, 32. I mean, I do remember Les Miles for a couple of games, but I really remember about the wins and kind of the let her rip quote from seeing the replays and, seeing the Pistols Firing podcast replays of it, not necessarily from, second and third grade. So it just is an odd deal from a state fandom. Of course, got to ask you here, basketball plays tonight. And so you already know the score by the time this podcast comes out, but Robert Jennings' birthday, he's still injured, so happy birthday to him on the day of recording this. But what kind of the basketball wise, the Northwestern win last week, how good of a win was that? Was that Northwestern could be a good team, but we don't know? Or, how do we kind of grade that win? It seems like KenPom.com had them pretty high overall before going into the game, and still has them pretty high in the net ratings from what I've seen.
Yeah, they're actually ranked ahead of Oklahoma State in the net somehow right now, which it's just computers at this point. There's still a lot of data collection that's going to take place. It's still just I guess it's December now. I was going to say it's November. The time's moving quickly, but yeah, I think it was a solid win. Anytime you beat a Big Ten team essentially on the road, going to Chicago and doing that. The game didn't tip until dang near 10 o'clock, which is a unique thing that obviously both teams had to overcome, but Oklahoma State looks like they handled it a little bit better. So yeah, I think that's a solid win. That the team is looking, as good as it's looked in some time. The coaches are still very much worried. And I don't know if worried is the right word. Maybe worried is the right word about the defense and just sort of the effort level on that end of the floor. I think they know that the guys with their length are capable of being a more consistent defensive unit. So that's maybe the area of concern, but pretty much everything else is going correctly. The team is, averaging like 92 points a game or something like that right now. This is like the best offensive team that they've had since maybe like those Marcus Smart teams, whenever you had like 3 NBA guys on the floor. So yeah, I think it's been an awesome start to the season. Something that they'll need to continue. I think that Bedlam game is going to be big for a lot of reasons. Obviously, it's an SEC team that you're playing, but for it to be a rival, if Oklahoma State gets to that game undefeated and wins it, what can that do in terms of excitement for the fan base moving forward? I think that one's going to be a big one. This Sam Houston game, this Sam Houston team's like ranked somewhere in the 70s in the net, which we just talked about how the net's maybe not fully complete yet, but I think they're ahead of like 5 Big 12 teams. So this could be a big notch in Oklahoma State's belt whenever the selection process comes in March, and it maybe doesn't necessarily seem like that because it's Sam Houston, but I think it's been an outstanding start to the year, one that I've personally been waiting on forever because I've watched a ton of bad basketball from the 300 level of Gallagher Arena over the past 10 years.
Yeah, that the media table's not doing us any favors in seeing the plays develop on the court from a courtside view. Of course, we can see the overhead shot and really know how many miles guys are running. But what can you say to kind of Steve Lutz? Because I got to say, just for 2 seconds here, when I'm watching the Steve Lutz like post game press conference stuff like that, and then I hear your voice or hear someone say, "Oh, thanks, Marshall," or whatever, I'm like, okay, got a good question coming. Like, there's going to be a good one here for Marshall because he's always on top of it and asking stuff. But what if you really learned about Steve Lutz over this kind of year and now some change, and I like him a lot more, I assume, but what do you think kind of makes it all work where he's 7-0 and has this roster that is all a bunch of transfers in and making it work all together?
Yeah, I think he's a hard A, to put it bluntly. Like I've heard a lot of, I don't know if horror stories, but lore about his practices and just sort of how tough they are. He doesn't let us into those practices, which only like adds to the myth. So I haven't seen one firsthand personally, but a lot of those European guys that came, they said that first day of practice was the hardest practice that they've ever gone through, and those guys played professional basketball overseas. So I think those practices are really tough. I think he's very demanding as a coach, but I think at the same time players understand that like he's doing this to get the best out of you, and I think that's an important line to be had. That he's not just being hard on you to be hard on you. I think in terms of Mike Boynton, who was maybe more players coach, Mike Boynton could. I sat in on some Mike Boynton practices. He could get on some guys with the best of them as well. So I'm not saying that, but I just think that's maybe more of Lutz's style. He's more stern. Even in press conferences, he's pretty subdue a lot. His team is 7-0, and he's worried about defense. So I think that's just sort of who Steve Lutz is in a certain extent. I think that's, a good way. Obviously it's looking like a good way to build a basketball program.
Yeah, we're definitely scoring it out. That's the one thing that's really nice to see, is that we do not seem to have a lot of offensive challenges. Now, granted, knocking a bunch of wood here as we do play a team in the top 100, 70 net tonight. But we've got another like weird semi-away game is how Ken Palm references it, because it's in Arizona and it's at the Suns Arena, but it's against Grand Canyon, who's not technically next door, but is pretty close by. What do you kind of think about this, kind of stretch here we've got before conference play? Should this team be undefeated after OU and kind of going on? Because let's be honest here, we've got basically an SEC team in Grand Canyon and then Kansas City and Cal State University, oh gosh. But, we basically have a bunch of no names here where the icons do not load on Google is what I'm getting at, not to disparage them. But what do you think? Are the expectations too high? Is what I'm getting at here, more or less.
I don't think so. That Grand Canyon game is going to be a good one. Grand Canyon's always like in and around, a tournament Cinderella. So I think that's a good game for the resume whenever they go out to Phoenix and play that one. The OU game's going to be big. I think OU's, in the top 70-ish of a lot of the metric rankings. So that's going to be a tough game. But outside of that, I think, I still stand on the Sam Houston game is going to be maybe tougher than people think. Sam Houston's only lost to Big 12 teams at this point in the year. So I think this one's going to be a little tougher than people think. I still expect Oklahoma State to win it, somewhat comfortably. But yeah, I think it's the Grand Canyon game, the OU game. And then if they can get out of those two, which, Ken Palm's projecting them to win both of those games, which again, Ken Palm, it's early, yada, yada, yada. But I think they, these two games, if they can do that, they're going to enter Big 12 play, I think, undefeated, which is sort of a crazy thought considering, all the basketball that we've watched over the past 10 years.
Yeah. Has there been a player that's really surprised you at all comparatively to how you thought the season would go? Because I got to say, there's several that surprised me, but Anthony Roy playing a lot is great here as of recent, but I thought he would be like the guy, but it seems like we've got Kanye Clary and Victorious Miller and like 6 other guys who can score here. Has there been a guy who's just really stood out to you?
Yeah, I think Victorious Miller's obviously just stood out. You see his scoring; he's averaging 17 a game at this point. I knew that he was talented because I'd sort of follow basketball recruiting to a certain extent, so I knew that he had talent. He played at LSU last year. He actually got on the floor as a true freshman, but I didn't expect with all the the offensive firepower that Lutz brought in this offseason that this kid as a true sophomore would be leading the way here as we start December. So I think he's been super impressive. Jalen Curry. He transfers from UMass. Hadn't played high major ball before and is fitting like a glove. His first step is ridiculously quick. His ability to get to the basket, get downhill. So I think he's been super impressive. And then you mentioned like a guy like Anthony Roy. We sort of thought, hey, this guy's gonna shoot the lights out, and that's what he's doing. I think those two, Victorious Miller and Jalen Curry, have maybe stood out in terms of surprises the most so far.
Yeah, I got to say, I'm also just really intrigued by having so many skilled big men on the roster. It seems like that over the years, that's been really where we've had a downfall of sorts. Is either the scoring issue or just not having enough big men. I know in your guys' on the Reload podcast, you just spoke about how you were, a year ago in Tulsa watching some of the bench guys get in and seeing them. Is there a guy from this team defensively that stands out to you as well too, whether it be a big guy, a small guy, or whoever it may be? I mean, is it Parsa? I mean, that's kind of my question here at the end of the day. Yeah,
Parsa's been really consistent. He's been like a rock. It's hard to. He hasn't maybe like been as flashy just because of some of the stuff that the guards are doing on the perimeter in terms of scoring, but he's been so consistent for Oklahoma State so far. They don't necessarily have like the springy rim defender like you think of like Yornay or Caleb Boone or Musa Cisse that the Boynton era had. Lutz hasn't exactly had one of those yet, but he's had like these big solid centers. Even Mili Vukovic didn't look great last year. He got to Stillwater late. He had a back injury going on, so he never really was able to catch his stride. He's playing significantly better this year than he did last year. I think they're really excited about this freshman named Ben Ahmed. He hasn't got to play this year because he had a preseason surgery on his foot that he's apparently getting closer to being back from. I think they're really excited about him. I think those guys, Isaiah Coleman, he's not a center. He's not protecting the rim or anything, but I think he's got some pretty active hands defensively. I was expecting him to be, in that offensive group of offensive firepower. And I think there are going to be nights where, he's in the 20s, fairly easily and that stuff. But I think I've been maybe more impressed with some of his defensive spurts so far in terms of just getting hands on loose balls and stuff like that. So, I think the team has the ability to play defense. And I think even whenever they've needed to, you think to that UCF game or the USF game, that they're able to flip that switch. It's just like getting that switch fully flipped for a full 40 minutes that maybe they're still working on right now.
Yeah, and you just spoke about Ben Ahmed. He's the one guy, at least ESPN list as a center on the roster. Right? It's the same height as Parsa, but Parsa's listed as forward for semantics and for being 25 pounds less. But yeah, I'm really excited to see a bunch more of these guys. I mean, basketball is seems like that is the sport to be excited about for Oklahoma State this year, at least for right now. Of course, with football changing stuff, I'm more curious here. We are one of the 4 unbeaten teams still in the Big 12. The Big 12 map is taking over. I mean, you got Colorado up there as well, which is not a powerhouse by any means, and especially in basketball, and not projected to do that well. So sometimes the schedule can just kind of really help you out depending on who you're playing. But I would say we played some pretty darn good teams here. Do you think we could really exceed any kind of lower tournament expectations, kind of maybe getting in the bubble? That's at least what I thought preseason wise. Do you think those expectations have been raised at all a little bit and valued as so?
Yeah, for me at least, it's so hard to even set expectations on teams nowadays because of the transfer portal and who knows who's on the roster. But for me, I think I was expecting a tournament team maybe on the bubble line going into the year. But I think right now I'd feel pretty good about Oklahoma State somewhat comfortably getting into the NCAA tournament field, which it feels crazy to say, and I'm trying not to. I've tried all throughout this stretch to not get too ahead of myself because I've seen Oklahoma State basketball over the last 10 years. But I think right now, in terms of at least my expectations, I think they have been raised a little bit about what this team's capable of just because of, the amount of scoring that they have. And like I said, they can play defense. It's just a matter of, sometimes they don't. But if they can get that flipped fully on, then I'm not sure there's a ton of teams, nationally that are going to be excited about playing Oklahoma State on a night-to-night basis. So I think they've certainly got a shot, which for the first time in a long time feels good to say.
Yeah, and the one guy I did not mention yet is Christian Coleman, which is one of the more unique stories in college basketball. I watched you sit down with Dave Hunziker. It's on YouTube. I'll link it here in the description as well. But learning that the guy took years off basketball because he was 6'1" and then randomly grows to be 6'8". I mean, randomly is a tough word, but he just kept playing hoops and kept doing it. And then gets an option there to play in his own home state, and then kind of keeps working his way up through Alabama. So really impressive to see that UAB transfer who played back in the same gym this year against Auburn for Oklahoma State. But just such a cool story there I want to mention as well. As kind of wrap this up here, what are you most excited for Oklahoma State sports-wise? If you had to say, hey, I'm more excited for basketball, for the new coach hire, for baseball, or for whatever it may be here. Wrestling, of course, too. How can I not say that? We're national champion contenders in wrestling, so I always want to mention that, and sometimes I always forget. But what do you think so far for this season?
Yeah, I think the general sentiment is like football is king. So I think a lot of people are going to be super on Eric Morris in that. But yeah, I think these winter sports are super exciting. This is the best that basketball has been in some time. And then you mentioned the wrestling program. For it to be almost overnight flipped back into like, okay, this is a nationally relevant program. I think it's been super cool. There's a lot of young guys that are on the map for Oklahoma State this year. They've got a lot of freshmen who are all of a sudden ranked second in the country at their weights, basically all over the place. So I think there's a lot to be excited about. Obviously, football is going to take some. It's going to be off the field stuff during the offseason, obviously, as they try and build this roster. That's going to be fun to follow along. But yeah, in terms of games actually being played, I think you're sort of spoiled for choice right now. If you're an Oklahoma State fan, looking at the men's basketball team, looking at the women's basketball team, and then getting into GIA for a duel. I think that Iowa duel, I think it's February 22nd. I think that's going to be sort of one of those events. Whenever you think of these massive games or events in Gallagher, I think back to like the Trae Young Bedlam game from our time in school, the Nick Piccinini pin in that Iowa duel when everybody went crazy. I think this Iowa duel at the end of February, I think is going to be one of those sort of atmospheres, and hopefully Oklahoma State can send those guys home happy. I'd imagine that's going to sell out. So yeah, lot to look. That's a long-winded way of saying there's a lot to look forward to. This quote unquote off season in terms of football.
Yeah, and I got to say the game that I'm most excited about basketball wise here is, of course, the highest priced ticket to see an Oklahoma State game this year, which weirdly enough, of course, is in February, but it's February 4th against BYU and Devonta from BYU, who's known consistently as a top 3 draft pick going to the NBA next year and has been recruited there, et cetera, et cetera. But get your tickets now, Cowboy fans, because that is already a $58 ticket on SeatGeek and the most expensive ticket for the season, it looks like here, except for maybe the KU game. So really excited to see that one. But of course, you got Arizona. They're undefeated. Iowa State's undefeated when recording this. Best wishes to them. Hopefully we face them when they're undefeated and make those tickets skyrocket and get OSU a little bit more money to be more flexible with all of the brand new adjustments here in Stillwater. Marshall, thanks so much for joining on the latest episode of CGA Tour podcast. If you're not already, I assume you are, but got to go subscribe to the Reload podcast with Nathan, Justin, and of course Marshall. That's weekly here, usually on Tuesdays. Am I right with that?
It's sort of just random at this point, but it has been Tuesdays here lately.
Yeah, so at least I know a podcast episode came out today as we're recording this, so no Tuesday this week. And of course, check out pistolsfiringblog.com and make sure you're following at Marshall Scott OK on X, Twitter, wherever you get your information. And then if you're already, please follow, subscribe, all that good type of stuff here to the CGA Tour podcast, and make sure you tune in every single week here as we try to recap the Oklahoma State latest and greatest news. Marshall, thanks so much again, and we'll catch you guys again soon.
Hey, Cowboy fans. Today's episode is brought to you by Oakley Burklow, your go-to independent insurance agent and proud OSU alum. Oakley helps with home, auto, life, and business insurance, working with multiple top-rated insurance companies to find you the right coverage at the right price. Licensed in Oklahoma and Arkansas. Call 918-280-9068 or email oakley.burklow@connectmyinsurance.com. Personal service, honest advice, and a fellow poke helping you protect what matters.